What is going down, Sourdough Squad? We got our main man back in the building. We've got Jordan Elliott, staff writer for Niners Nation, to talk about a lot of the things that went down with all the owners' meetings and all the quarterbacks talk. And we're going to kind of break it down from a different level. So stay tuned. We're going to get into it right after this. Let's go. Smash that like button if you haven't already. Love to see it. What's good, everybody? And of course, what is good, Jordan? How are we feeling? About a month away from the NFL draft, and obviously pretty much made it through free agency and, of course, the owners' meetings that happened this week. But how are you feeling overall about the San Francisco 49ers up until this point?
Surprised, but I shouldn't be surprised. Like if you would have told me like 10 months ago, when it was pretty clear it would have been Jimmy's last year with the team, and then Trey was the future. He's a starting quarterback going into last year. I'd be like, all right, like we weathered the storm. No more of these off-season quarterback debates, and here we are. And it is Groundhog Day. It's happening again. So I guess at this point, I should just like know better and be better prepared for just an off season like this every single year. Hopefully they find a guy that can stick long term and we don't have to do this every year, but it looks like we have another long off season of the last couple of years it's just been two quarterbacks. Now there's three quarterbacks in the mix. So it's the stakes have been raised. So we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. And I promise you, I'm not just going to ask Jordan about quarterbacks. Obviously, it's the hot topic right now, so we will address it. And I want to get his opinion because I know Jordan watches film. He looks at everything. He writes a ton of words for Niners Nation. I mean, probably one of the most in-depth guys when it comes to breaking this stuff down out here in the 49ers community. So, of course, I want to get his take on the quarterback position, but we are going to talk about free agency, some of the guys that he may like. So stick around. We'll talk a little draft too. But again, the main point of emphasis right now, because of the owners' meetings, is the quarterback. Obviously, you alluded to it. I remember, man, go back to 2021, when me and you were out here grinding draft content, doing mock drafts, all that type of stuff. And then I remember when the San Francisco 49ers traded up to number 3, you're like, man, this is exciting. But I'm kind of bummed because that means we don't have that much draft stuff to talk about. Obviously, we got a lot of picks later, but it really put the emphasis on the quarterback. And so like you said, last couple of years, all we've been talking about is the quarterback. And it did feel like we got a little bit of clarity, I guess. I think in regards to the way Brock Purdy was playing at the end of the year, he was playing really well, went on that winning streak, but unfortunately gets hurt, and we know the story with the UCL. Now we have Trey Lance, and so it felt like, okay, Trey Lance is going to get that opportunity to be able to come back and, like Kyle Shanahan said at the owners meeting, regain quarterback one positioning. But what Kyle Shanahan also said, and what the 49ers did, is they went and brought in Sam Darnold, and they said that he's going to be splitting reps. So when you see everything that was discussed, the moves that have been made, and obviously everything that's happened since 2021, where do you kind of see, and this is a broader question and we'll drill down, but like, where do you kind of see the quarterback position heading as we go into OTAs and into training camp?
So I wrote a little bit about this last night. I guess it went up today, like this afternoon, and I just kind of tried to piece together all the evidence we've gotten from the on the field stuff, the comments that were made. And the takeaway I came away with was it feels like the 49ers are 100% committed to Brock Purdy being the guy, and they pretty much are just riding this optimistic timeline that he's going to be back in time for camp, or back early enough in camp that it's not going to completely throw off the beginning of the season, and he'll have time to get into a rhythm, which is extremely important when we're talking about timelines. Jimmy's been in the league for a long time. He didn't get training camp reps last year, and I thought it showed early on. He looked pretty rusty before really coming into form after. So I think those reps are really important for Purdy. But I think based on everything that John and Kyle said, it seems pretty obvious that they have a level of confidence in Brock Purdy that it doesn't feel like is matched for the other guys on the roster. Obviously, Darnold's a newer player. There's going to be more of a feeling out process with where they're at with him and their level of confidence after some OTAs and stuff. So the big one's obviously Trey Lance. And I just think no matter what you hear them say about Trey Lance or what you hear, at the podium, the actions aren't really reflecting a high level of confidence in a guy that they moved mountains to acquire not even 2 full calendar years ago. So, at the end of the day, if they end up with a quarterback that's viable, which Purdy showed he could be, I don't think it matters as much. But I do think there is a level of concern where it's like, hey, you guys, moved all this capital to move up for a guy who's played in 4 games and, you're already kind of out on him. And it feels like no matter what they say, the actions are reflecting that they just don't have that confidence.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like the time is running out for Trey Lance with the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, it's been a hard time for him to see the field, and I think one of the things that you and I both talked about, we both liked Trey Lance coming out of NDSU, but again, I think it's the main talking point is like reps, right? It's what it comes down to. It's like we needed to see him actually get out there on the field, and whether that's due to injury or whether that's due to Jimmy Garoppolo being there for his rookie season, he just hasn't seen that opportunity. But it doesn't feel like the San Francisco 49ers have the time to really wait and see. They are continuously reloading the roster. They go out and they get Javon Hargrave. That feels like a win now move. They still have a phenomenal core, and it still feels like the tone coming from the team, at least, is Trey still needs time, right? So it is going to be really interesting to see what ultimately happens with Trey. Do you think that Trey will play out his rookie contract with the San Francisco 49ers, or do you think maybe as it stands right now, all options are open and they're going to see what, multiple things could potentially happen?
I don't think it makes sense to trade him right now unless you get back a really good haul. And I don't see, with all due respect to Trey, like there hasn't been a sample size that would make another team want to give up the picks that would justify the 49ers incurring the dead cap hit that would come with moving him this offseason. If things continue on the course they're on now, next offseason will be extremely interesting, especially if maybe they find something with Darnold they really like, Purdy recovers well, and they're like, hey, you know what, like, these are our guys going forward. Do we want to give Trey a fresh start? There's a million ways you could spin it to move off of him, and maybe a team that really liked him a couple of years ago when he was coming out. Because that's the thing that we have to remember here, right? Like the Niners did move all the capital to get him, but they weren't the only team that liked him. And I think that oftentimes what gets overlooked, Brad, is once these guys get drafted to other teams, people still keep tabs on these players. Like when I was at Stanford's Pro Day, John Lynch was talking about how like they really liked Isaiah Oliver at Colorado coming out. He's been with the Falcons for the last few seasons, but they still keep tabs on these players once they're in the pros. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if another front office was like, hey, you know what, it didn't work out in San Francisco. We have a little bit more time to be patient with this guy, or we feel like our coaching staff can take a different angle and really get the best out of this player. So next offseason would be the time to watch. How do they pick up the 5th-year option at this point unless something changes this year? So if they don't, that really limits it to next offseason really being the defining outcome of if that ends up happening. But I would say yes for now, just because I don't see the benefit to moving him, because you're not only taking the financial hit, you're also admitting that you missed badly and not getting a great return on top of it. And I just don't think that the pros outweigh the cons of moving him at this point.
Right, because I think when we focus so much, as fans on the in between the lines and the production on the field and stuff like that, but this this part of the off season is where the business gets done. This is looking for return on investment, putting, all this investment into certain players and seeing what the return is going to be. And so giving up on Trey Lance in the sense of trading him for a 5th-round pick, 6th-round pick, it would feel like it'd make more sense just to keep him at that rate than to trade him. And again, it almost comes across as an admission of a failed pick, essentially trading up all that capital and getting nothing in return for him. So I agree with you too. I had the similar conversation. It does feel like Trey should be here for at minimum one more year. But I think next year, like you alluded to as well, there's one more year of team control. Then you add the fifth year contract, which technically is two, but you get the cost controlled fourth year. And then obviously that takes a big rise if you pick up the fifth year. So it will be fascinating, I think, what ultimately happens there. And again, we don't know what's happening with Brock Purdy. We don't know when Brock Purdy's going to be able to come back in. I mean, we heard maybe training camp from John Lynch. We heard maybe week 1 through 4, sometime through there. So I think the timetable with Brock Purdy is fluid. But I also thought you said something that was interesting about teams keeping tabs on players that maybe they didn't draft, because I think the San Francisco 49ers brought in a quarterback this year that they have been keeping tabs on since he came out of USC. I know Mike Shanahan, I think he went on Colin Cowherd before that particular draft, talked highly of Sam Darnold. I think the Shanahans have liked Sam Darnold for some time. What is your particular takeaway of Sam Darnold being added to this roster amidst the current quarterback kind of room, I guess you could say? And what's your outlook for Sam Darnold? Is this quarterback 3, or is this a guy that could actually push not only Trey Lance, but could also potentially push Brock Purdy?
I think that when Sam Darnold signed and what he signed for was very telling because, I put this in the article I wrote today. Like, I don't think necessarily teams would have been at each other's throats, like in a, mad dash to get Sam Darnold on their team. But I think he would have had a strong market. I think that he has showed down the backstretch of last season that there was a lot of blame you could place on environment and surrounding for maybe the rough start he had to his career, and that he still does have a lot of those traits. And there is still always going to be value in having a quarterback that can make the throws that he can make and has the arm talent that he has. And I don't think he would have signed so quickly for a deal that's so incentive laden if he didn't feel like he had a strong chance to, at minimum, be the number 2 quarterback. But I think he was told that he would have a chance to be the starter based on his play. And I think that it would have been relayed to him. And again, this is all just speculation on my part, just kind of piecing together information. I have no idea what specifics were said between Sam Darnold's people and the 49ers front office. But for him to sign so quickly in free agency on a deal that's so dependent on incentives with all this up in the air, and now you're hearing Kyle Shanahan saying, oh, no, they'll be splitting first-team reps. Like, we want to get a look at Sam Darnold with the ones. Like, to me, it makes all the sense in the world that he would be told, like, hey, you can bet on yourself here. Like, you'd have a realistic chance. This isn't a scenario where we're bringing you in just to be depth as our third quarterback. The Niners got Jimmy G around like Halloween of 2017, and that would have been Darnold's last year at USC. These scouts are working years in advance. Like, they're getting draft boards together years in advance. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if the 49ers had been doing extensive homework on that quarterback class, given their lack of having one, at the first year of Kyle and John's regime. So
They hadn't won a game right through halfway through that season. So it looked like they were going to be primed to pick in the top 5.
And people, it's revisionist history, right? Because we've seen Darnold play in the NFL now. But I remember USC played Cal, and I remember there were like Jets fans there with like "Suck for Sam" signs because they were like, they were like so hyped to like get tank for Sam Darnold because Sam Darnold looked like he was going to be a really good NFL quarterback. So I think there's a very realistic outcome where it was like, hey, we like this guy coming out, we like his traits. We ended up getting Jimmy. We started winning games with Jimmy. We didn't need Sam Darnold in 2018, but here we are in 2023. We still like his traits, and we can get him for a very low risk, high upside, investment. And that's the thing, right? Like, if he ends up panning out, it looks really good. We keep talking about how Shanahan's this, the best friend of an NFL quarterback with his scheme and can get the most out of these guys. And if it doesn't work out, people are just like, all right, well, Sam Darnold's not very good. He hasn't been very good everywhere he's been. It's just Sam Darnold. So the 49ers really are taking this on with absolutely no risk and added upside. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world to bring him in. And I think once OTAs, minicamp, training camp starts, people are going to be really surprised when they start hearing some of the reports coming out about what Sam Darnold can do with his arm, because I think the guy's a lot more talented than maybe his statistics or the narrative surrounding him would lead people to believe.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think it even last year? Was it Josh Rosen last year or the year before that they brought him in from the same class as Sam Darnold?
It was like the very end of 2020, if I remember correctly, like that nightmare season where they just
Yeah, and he
hurt.
was in training camp for a little while, but he didn't make it through. I think he got beat out. I forget who. He got beat out by like two other quarterbacks. But he was in camp with the San Francisco 4. And the only reason I bring that up is because he was in the same class as Sam Darnold. But Sam Darnold is very intriguing to me personally, and especially last night. I was like, all right, it's time to do the deep dive, time to hop into the film. And I know you've already broken down the film quite a bit, so you already know this. But as I'm watching, and the one that I chose was Bucks versus Panthers, week 7. I think it was week 17 last year, towards the end of the year, where he, like you mentioned earlier, he did have a better kind of uptick when he started to get some starting opportunities. So I wanted to watch something kind of after he's already had some time to play. I'm not going to lie, Jordan. Like, I'm watching Sam Darnold out here, and I'm like, damn, this dude's throwing darts. Like, and a lot of the things that I came away liking from Brock Purdy, kind of, you see some of the pocket mobility. And when we say pocket mobility, we're not talking about like Lamar Jackson or anything like that, but he's a plus athlete from the quarterback position. You can see him shuffling around in the pocket. You can see him fading from pressure. You can see him kind of having to step up, reset, throw darts, kind of off platform a little bit. And I'm like, well, clearly the arm is still there. And that was never really his issue, right? I think coming out of USC, I think one of the things that we always talked about with Sam Darnold was the talent is there. It's just the processing, it's the decision making, it's the confidence, right? It's the intangible things that Brock Purdy feels like he already, as a rookie, has that figured out. That's where Sam Darnold was still developing. And what I'm wondering is, with Sam Darnold, kind of, and I listened to the pod that he was on. I think it was with Kyle Allen and I forget the other gentleman that I think Carson Palmer's brother, Jordan Palmer, is a quarterback coach. Um, he was talking about how getting drafted by the New York Jets, the pressure that he put on himself, and everything that comes along with that, to then not getting that opportunity to really kind of develop with the new coaching staff with Saleh, getting traded to the Panthers, kind of disregarded by the Panthers. He got to pick the 49ers, and the 49ers got to pick him. And it does feel like there is a mutual confidence in each other to get the job done. So, what I'm very interested in is, like you said, I think we are going to get into OTAs and training camp, and some of the reports that we are going to hear, I think we're going to be surprised. I think you could absolutely hear that, hey, Sam Darnold is really pushing Trey Lance, and that's even with Trey Lance having a good camp. I, I'm not gonna lie. It's one game. It's one game. I still have more games. I've been talking to some people offline. They're like, hey, check out this game, check out that game. All right, I'm gonna continue to do my research. But am I tripping? Does it feel? It feels like Sam Darnold could actually do something with the San Francisco 49ers this year.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I guess it's the thing that's really clouding everything is Brock Purdy's timeline, because it's just, again, it feels like if he was completely healthy right now, it feels like he would be without a doubt the guy, and it would be his job to lose, and he would be getting the first team reps, and it would take something extremely miraculous for the other guys to unseat him. And even still, like, it still feels like what can they do in mini camp and OTAs when you're out there in shorts and a t-shirt, you're not even in pads throwing around. Like, a lot of people are going to look good throwing the ball in OTAs. Training camp comes around, and I think it's a little bit easier to make those evaluations when both players or all three players are out on the field at the same time in the same conditions, going against the same defense. But what's going to end up happening if Purdy isn't ready to go at the start of camp, or throughout any duration of camp, is you're going to be comparing camp performances to Purdy playing games in December and winning playoff games in January. And I just wonder how much, like John Lynch said something that really stuck with me. I included in my article where it was like, like, oh, it was something along the lines of, I apologize for not having the direct quote. It was like, we believe in Trey, but the way Brock played, like, we kind of, he kind of has to be the guy. We'll always have the competition, which is a good thing, right? Like, we'll always have the competition. How in the world can you have a competition with a guy that isn't even on the field at the same time? Like, it's Trey Lance going out there and Sam Darnold going out there and Brock still rehabbing his elbow, but Brock's still the leader in the clubhouse, which was the quote we got. So it feels, again, like everything's setting up where it's like, sure, there's an outcome where Trey Lance comes in, he looks really good, he's healthy, and he just seizes that job. But what's the path to that, and how much is that off-season performance going to carry the same weight that Brock Purdy's play in December and January did? And it's not just John Lynch, it's not just Kyle, it's the players. Like, you can see how much these guys rallied around that guy. And it has nothing to do with them not liking Trey or having, alliances to a certain guy. These guys just want to win football games, and they just want to get the ball in their hands. The more football games they win and the more times they get the ball in their hands, the happier they're going to be, the more money they're going to get when it's time to get contracts. And Brock Purdy was pretty good at distributing the football, and he obviously was pretty good at winning football games too. So I just think at the end of the day, it just comes down to the fact that, like, Purdy's gotten the tangible sample size that's allowed him to cultivate that organic belief. And just for, the unfortunate string of bad injury luck, we haven't gotten to really see that from Trey Lance. And at a certain point, it's like, will we ever get to? Because it's hard to go back and pivot off of the guy who did win all those games and looked good doing it in Brock Purdy. And I thought that the injury happening maybe would open that door, but based on what we heard from Kyle and John, like, it feels like that didn't really change their belief much. Like, they're just still riding this optimistic timeline.
Yeah, and it's also, like you alluded to too, it's the players. Like, I think that's those are the guys that I really like kind of perk up and listen to, and when it comes to kind of giving their evaluations of the quarterback, because they're not going to go out of their way to like put down any of these guys. Like, they're going to speak positively about their teammates. That's how it works. But you can kind of read in between the lines, and it's like you have 49ers defenders like Fred Warner going on, I think it was a Bustin' with the Boys podcast, being like, I knew Brock Purdy had it from practice. Like, I knew he had that it intangible, that elite competitiveness, all that type of stuff. Yeah, I think Brock Purdy has some limitations from a physical standpoint, but everything that we continue to hear about this guy is he is elite intangibles. Like, he's elite competitor. He is elite in elite might be premature, a little bit too premature, but in the sense of saying, like, he's already got strong leadership qualities as a rookie and strong mastership of Kyle Shanahan's offense as a rookie. And that's hard to do. Like, so I think it speaks for something, but it also, if we take a look at Corey Soto's super chat, appreciate it, my guy. He says, imagine Apple aborting the first prototype of the iPhone. Doesn't work, trash. How much do you think we knew about disease after 3 hours? That's about how much game time Lance has had. And I understand what Corey's saying about game time. We've seen 4 games over 2 years, right? We haven't seen a whole lot of Trey Lance in game time, but just like I talked about, Fred Warner said he knew Brock had it from practice. So they see him. I think that's the hard part. And I'll give you an opportunity to like give your thoughts, but I feel like that's part of the hard part is like, we aren't in the building. We aren't in practice. Like, we're not in the day to day where clearly they have infinitely more information than we do about these players. And when we don't see these players, it just gives us time to speculate. And they clearly know, they probably have a really good idea of what Trey is. Would you say that?
I think that they do, in a sense that there's enough there that there's a level of hesitation to continue just committing to giving him the reps that it seemed like they were committed to at the beginning of last season. Like, they were like, hey, it's year 2. We moved all this capital. We have to see what we have in this guy. Mm-hmm. That same energy doesn't feel like it's there. And it's very interesting, right? Because I do think that Purdy, that it's a smaller sample size, but I thought Purdy looked as good, if not better, than any stretch of games we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo when he's been here. But you could also pivot back on, well, hey, we won a ton of games with Jimmy. It's hard to move off of Jimmy, and they moved, or they traded 2 first-round picks, they swapped one, they invested 3 first-round picks to get a guy to replace the guy who won a ton of games. So it's really interesting that they were at one point very committed to moving off of a guy who had won a lot more games in Jimmy Garoppolo to now, Purdy has the 7-8 game sample size, whatever it may be. And they're like, nope, this is the guy. Like, he's the leader in the clubhouse. He's
even when they committed to Trey Lance, they still brought back Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, and I think it made sense because I think it was a good insurance. And hey, it arguably saved their season, right? Because who knows if Purdy comes in that early in the season and looks the way he does. Maybe he does. It's hard to doubt him with the way he stepped in and played. But Jimmy played at a really high level. They won a lot of games with them this year, and it put them in position to win the division, have a home playoff game. And it was for a very cost-efficient, investment. It was a very smart, savvy business move at that point in time. I just think at the end of the day, right? So there's some numbers that kind of stood out to me that really kind of tell the tale of all of this, right? So Trey Lance, his first year at NDSU, I don't think he played very much. He only had a handful of snaps, but that's the first year of college ball is 2018. Since 2018, in college and the pros, Trey Lance has had 495 dropbacks across 5 seasons. That's not pass attempts. That's just that's dropbacks, because I think you need to include the total dropbacks because you're still dropping back and seeing things, even if you're tucking and scrambling, throwing the ball away, whatever it may be, even getting sacked, you're still seeing things, right? When we're talking about reps. Brock Purdy had over 400 dropbacks in each of his last 3 college seasons, and he averaged 470 per year in each of the last 3 years he was at Iowa State. So Purdy, on average, had almost the same amount of dropbacks that Lance has had total over the last 5 years. And over that same span, Sam Darnold's had nearly 2,000. He's had 1,995 dropbacks at the NFL level for an average of 399 per year. So essentially what these guys are seeing on average every single season is what Trey Lance has seen over the course of 5 years. And, getting into the reasoning of why that's happened and why that's been the case is a totally different discussion. But I think that is really important here because the 49ers did something extremely unprecedented, and they took a quarterback from a lower level of football at the collegiate level who had a historically small sample size for where he was drafted. And, as much as I like the tape, I think that a lot of people like the tape. I think a lot of people still do. It was a huge risk then, and it looks like, looking back on it with the power of hindsight, it's much easier to question the decision-making that went into that, not realizing, hey, we have a much bigger project on our hands than maybe we thought. Maybe we bit off more than we could chew with this one. And I think that's just really where they're at, Brad, where they thought that maybe this timeline wouldn't take as long. And I obviously don't think that they accounted for the fact there would be an unfortunate injury. That stroke of bad luck to have a guy fall on you in a pile of players, you snap your ankle and you miss the majority of a season, right? Like things like that are really hard to predict. But I just think that it was a massive gamble. And I hate to say this as somebody who likes making bets here and there. Sometimes when you bet big, you lose big. And the 49ers might be in a spot where they just unfortunately took a swing and they missed. And we won't know for a couple years. We can't have a final verdict on that. But based on the way things are heading, it's hard to feel more optimistic than not about the future of Trey Lance with the 49ers. That doesn't mean he can't be good somewhere else. It just feels like the fit isn't really lining up, and their actions and their words are reflecting that.
And I think that last point is like, I think what we're trying to quantify about the Trey Lance era is like, Trey Lance could very well still come out and be a phenomenal quarterback in this league a couple years down the road, maybe even with a different team and a different environment and a different situation, all that type of stuff. But with how we've seen it play out with the San Francisco 49ers and, kind of their win now mentality, and like you did a phenomenal job kind of laying out Trey Lance's, where he needed to work. We know he has the traits. We know he has pretty solid intangibles in it, but he was just raw, right? He was a raw prospect. And so when they get to the NFL, we don't necessarily going to translate. Sometimes it takes players longer than others. I still think Trey Lance is like younger than like 80% of the quarterbacks in this current draft. Right? Like I think he's still a very young player and he still has an opportunity to get better. I think what we are now starting to ask is that going to happen with the San Francisco 49ers? Because clearly Brock Purdy has proven to this organization that he's capable of winning big time games, and they hold that in a high regard. I think they've all talked about it. Like once we get you in the building, we don't care where you were drafted. I mean, look at some of the best players on this team. Dre Greenlaw is a fifth round pick. Kittle fifth round. Warner's a third round. Like we've got a bunch of undrafted free agent guys. You know, Mooney Ward is undrafted free agent. They paid him big money. I don't think they really. I mean, obviously they care from the business aspect of it, like we talked about earlier. But when it comes to the performance on the field, they just want the guy who's going to go out and do it and that they know can do it. And I think that's a huge part of this battle because there are tons of guys in the NFL that have potential, but they don't get the opportunity to show it. And I think they've seen that Brock's gotten the opportunity. He showed it, and they feel comfortable with that. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens with Trey Lance moving forward. I don't think Trey Lance is necessarily uh, doom and gloom from his career trajectory standpoint, but we just don't know if that will ultimately pan out with San Francisco 49ers. Like, that's kind of like where we're kind of wrapping up like the Trey Lance conversation, right? It's like he's going to have the opportunity to go out and try to compete. But like you said, how do you compete OTA reps and training camp reps versus divisional round playoff games or wild card playoff games like Brock Purdy? Like, how do you weigh that out? So it's there's still a lot to figure out with Trey Lance. It's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah, and it's like at a certain point, whatever we think about things only matters so much. Like, yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have, and I always love hearing people's opinions on it. But the actions and the words of the front office is really going to be what matters, right? And it just feels
Mhm.
like there's this lack of being willing to just have the vote of confidence in Trey that they seem to have in Purdy. And I can understand having the tangible sample size of live action game reps, and especially football in December is a lot different than football in September. I think there's added weight to
Yep.
the amount of pressure in those games, playing in those playoff games, even if it wasn't perfect. I think that went a long way for both the front office and the players. But at a certain point, it's really hard to ignore the writing seemingly, being on the wall. And I think that the best possible outcome for the 49ers would be that Trey Lance wows them in training camp and offseason and gives them a very tough decision to make because you can't give up that kind of capital and move on from a guy this early. It would be, and again, this is premature, and this is just if they were to move on, if they had their reasons, whatever they wanted to do, and they moved on, and they got back mid round, day 2, day 3 pick or whatever, that would arguably go down as one of the worst draft day trades or draft trades, whatever trade you want to label it as in NFL history. And it's really unfair, I think, because a lot of it has to do with just the fit not being good. And I don't think it's a reflection of Trey Lance, the player. I don't think it's necessarily a reflection of the 49ers as an organization. I just think that it was something that on paper may have sounded good in 2020, 21, but with hindsight in 2023, it's kind of like, what the hell were you thinking, man? Like this just because if you remember, like I forget the exact quote, but I remember Kyle said something about how they thought Trey Lance was the most pro-ready from day one quarterback in that class, and I think that they genuinely felt like because of his experience dropping back, turning his back to a defense in a
Mhm.
pro-style run-heavy offense, he could have been a guy starting from year one. And it's just like, man, 300 some odd snaps at the FCS level. I hate that.
Didn't play from behind. They were
Mhm.
motorboating teams, and they're a run first team too. So it wasn't like it was on his shoulders, right? So
Yeah,
like there wasn't a huge sample size even then.
Yeah, and I think like at the end of the day, it's like I hate to put it this way, Brad, because no 49ers fan wants to hear this. Like it feels like this almost is just going to be like a cautionary tale for every other team, and the 49ers are going to be the mistake that everybody else learns from. And there's plenty of examples of players getting drafted by a team, the environment, the fit, the timing isn't great. They go somewhere else and they end up being really good. And I think that one thing you can say about Trey Lance is that the guy has everything you hear from people that, not just people close that are biased, but people who've worked with him that I've spoken to and things that have been told, off the record, is that the guy does work really hard. He does come in, he does put in the time, he spends the time grinding film. This isn't a matter of, he just doesn't care or he doesn't have the work ethic.
Marcus, like Russell work ethic. Like that's not the case.
It's not something like that at all. And I think that having that, that dedication to getting better is something that doesn't go away. And I think that maybe it just needs to be a change of scenery. But yeah, like it's really hard if we're being honest with ourselves and we look inward. Like the outcomes of Trey Lance being the franchise quarterback for the next 10 years, like it's increasingly less likely that's happening the farther along we go. And the more often we don't hear these votes of confidence in him. And that's just the sad truth of things. But, I've been wrong before. I'd love to be wrong again about this. But we'll see how it plays out.
I think we would both, kind of look at the situation and hope Trey Lance wows all of us and outperforms Purdy, outperforms Sam Darnold, completely takes the league by storm. I mean, that's what we were hoping for. That's why both you and I were really excited when they took Trey Lance at 3. But again, like we have to be, like you said, we just have to be honest with ourselves and have an honest conversation about it. Doesn't mean we've given up on Trey, but it's also like we're trying to really piece all this stuff together over the past couple years and try to project it forward. But it's a projection. Like we could be off, like we could not be seeing this the way that it actually turns out. So it'll be interesting to see. But it just feels like the scales are tipping further away from Trey than they are tipping towards him. So we'll continue to see how it ultimately plays out. Tia says, but we also paid Jimmy after, and he looked good for 8 games as well. Look at how that turned out for us. They couldn't wait to get rid of him. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a little different. I think it's a good point that, small sample sizes can be a little misleading. It's revisionist history because full disclosure, I was as excited as anybody when Jimmy looked good towards the end of 2017. I was like, okay, like they're winning games with this guy. Like after these last rough 3 years, whatever it had been, like this is the turning point. They got a quarterback. If you look at the game film, which I've done a few times for various articles and things I've worked on for those 5 games and even the first couple games of 2018 before he got hurt, the 49ers were winning games a lot. I don't say in spite of Jimmy Garoppolo, but he was not this like end all be all reason they were winning football games. I think that he was the common denominator and he gave a spark to that team that, leads us to believe kind of with the revisionist history that, hey, Jimmy Garoppolo came in and won all these games. He was making a lot of the same mistakes he's making now. He had a lot of misses that he has now, and he had a lot of, good. He was basically the same Jimmy. There's a lot of good there too. I don't want to just be dumping on the guy. Like there was a lot of good there too. But I think that what we saw from Purdy's sample size was much more impressive than what we saw from Jimmy's initial sample size, if that makes sense. So I agree it is still a small sample size and that has to be accounted for. But I think if we're looking at just the individual play of the quarterback, the ability to create off script, the ability to execute with timing, efficiency, get into a rhythm, I was far more impressed with what I saw from Brock Purdy's first 8 games than Jimmy's first 8 games with the 49ers. But yeah, that's a fair point. And I think that the difference here is that you have Purdy on a deal where he's accounting for a fraction of a percentage of the salary cap for the next 3 years. So, hey, if it doesn't work out, at least you're not stuck making this massive financial commitment. In my eyes, and I don't know the logistics of the negotiations, and maybe he wouldn't have played if they did it. I think the 49ers should have franchise tagged Jimmy in 2018.
Yeah.
See a little bit bigger sample size.
Yeah, get a full year maybe.
Yeah, before giving him that big deal. But at the same time, too, as much as they were quick to move on, and now he's, obviously with the Raiders, they won a lot of football games with Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think that you could argue, if you're them, that, hey, it was a successful tenure. Like, we felt like we got our money's worth out of the guy. 3 NFC championship games, went to a Super Bowl, almost won one. But I just think that it's a little different in the sense that I saw things from Brock Purdy in the first 2 or 3 games that I never saw in 5 years of Jimmy Garoppolo. And that's no disrespect to Jimmy Garoppolo. It's just more so reflective of just kind of how special of a player Purdy can be, and how, I think one thing that ends up happening, Brad, is I'm trying really hard to not use the word potential and equate it to physical talent. I'm trying to separate physical talent and the word potential, because I think somebody would look at Brock Purdy, and because he's a little bit undersized for the position, or he doesn't have the strongest arm, oh, he's okay, but that's just like, he has a high floor, low ceiling. Well, why is ceiling immediately equated to arm strength and being big? And so there's plenty of big, strong quarterbacks that don't have what it takes between the ears or can't read a defense. And there's plenty of quarterbacks that maybe weren't the biggest that had an extremely high ceiling. Look at Drew Brees. Drew Brees had a Hall of Fame career. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. He's not a particularly big guy with a big arm, but he had it between the ears. He could read a defense. He was extremely good at operating within the structure of that offense he was in. So I just think that
Paxton Lynch was a physical specimen, right?
Yeah.
He could run and throw, cannon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where it's like, at the end of the day, and it's the same thing where it's like with Trey Lance, right? Like, people always talk about like the arm strength, and he can run and he's big and he's strong, but Trey Lance is extremely cerebral from what we hear too. He's really good at breaking down, the defenses on, they get him on the whiteboard, and he's really good at breaking down these coverages and these things that he's seeing. We haven't had the chance to see it translate to the field as much, but that should be included in the discussion of Trey Lance's potential, is the mental stuff. So I'm working really hard myself to avoid tying in physical strength and physical ability with the word potential, because I think they're two totally separate entities. And I think far too often we just equate being big and strong with a big arm or really fast to having a lot of potential.
I mean, well said. I can't disagree with you at all, because when we saw Jimmy playing, and again, you were the one who also made me think about this. You're like, is Jimmy Garoppolo playing at a top 10 level, like fringe top 10? And I was like, yeah, we had guys dropping down, right? Russell Wilson fell out, Stafford fell out, so it created opportunity for Jimmy Garoppolo to kind of, before he got hurt this year, to kind of, and he was playing at a high level. I think he really was. He was making better decisions, right? I think that's one of the things with Jimmy Garoppolo down that stretch when they started to go on that run. He was making better decisions. Brock Purdy, and being thrown into that game against the Dolphins, was already making better decisions in that game than what Jimmy was doing in that year prior. And we were talking about Jimmy's like, dang, is this the best we've seen Jimmy play? And I think that's what makes Brock I think that's why they have so much confidence in him, because you could see it from the very first game and all the way down to the end. He still has some things to work on. He can definitely clean up some of the timing, but when it comes to like reading the field, he does a really good job, and he's able to anticipate throws. And my favorite thing that Brock does is he's able to manipulate coverages with his eyes, and that's just one thing that I never saw Jimmy do. And he came in and did it the first game against the Dolphins, throwing like darts off of zero blitz, like getting out of like guys barreling down on him unblocked. And I was like, all right, it's pretty impressive. So, and he kept it going. And that's one of the things that we were looking for, is like, can he continue this? And then he goes, dismantles the Bucks, and it just kept. And now he had his moments where, some throws against the Raiders, they weren't that great. Like he made some interceptable passes and threw some interceptions. That's to come with the territory. He bounced back. He was able to come back, make good throws. He makes that rollout to the left, layered throw over the defenders to Kittle, and you're like, well, okay, he's still got it. Even on a down type game, he's still performing at a high level. So I think Brock is different from Jimmy. Back to the original question, kind of in that regard, is like, I think those intangible processing things that are really hard to, you can develop them, of course, but where Brock is at this stage, who's only going to develop further, that's where it feels like for me the difference is between Jimmy and Brock is already a much better processor, much better, sees the field better. Like and can distribute even a little bit better than Jimmy. So, but again, we'll see. We'll see. There's still plenty of time, and we still got to see how he bounces back from the UCL. Corey says, but there also so much we don't know about Purdy. Man, if Lance goes on to becomes a dude and Purdy is mid or worse in a larger sample size, unforgivable. And I think the I think the conversation just keeps coming back to like kind of here is like the 49ers traded up, and you've already went in depth on this, but they traded up what they did to get Trey. Trey, they don't totally, it doesn't feel like they have the confidence in Trey right now. What, it feels like the only way that the 49ers like come out on top in this situation, if Trey Lance isn't the guys, they got to win a Super Bowl, right? Like, how do you kind of like address this? Like, again, you talked about it. Like, if they miss on Trey, it will go down as one of the worst trades, pre-draft trades, like in a long time. Like, because again, they gave up a unprecedented amount to move up for a guy when theoretically, hindsight being what it is, they could have stayed at 12 and got a blue chipper, positional player. They could have got Slater. They could have got Micah Parsons. The list goes on and on of woulda, coulda, shouldas, or they could have taken a quarterback potentially at 12. But again, it's just like, it's just a tough position for the 49ers, right? Like they're in a tough scenario, right? In regards to this.
Yeah, I think too, like, and again, it's I'm not making any definitive judgments because I haven't seen enough of Trey Lance in an NFL environment in live action reps to make a definitive conclusion. But just based on what we've seen, like this argument that like, oh, what if he ends up being really good? Like, what are the odds that he ends up being really good compared to the odds that maybe he just isn't very good or he doesn't have that career arc where he is this really good quarterback? It's not just Trey Lance. It's very hard to be a good quarterback in the NFL. And there's guys we've seen that showed a lot more promise a lot earlier than what we've seen from Trey Lance, who ended up having just kind of middling, not great careers or who never ended up being great quarterbacks. And I think that's the biggest thing that I kind of am pushing back on a little bit now is that, like, what exactly have we seen from Trey Lance consistently that would make you feel like it's more likely than not that he's going to be a great quarterback? And I think that that's something that's really important because if you're going to make the argument like, oh, they can't let him go because what if he ends up being really good? You have to be pretty strong in your convictions that you think he's going to be that guy. I don't feel strongly either way yet because I really don't know. And I also don't have the access to seeing him in the building every day and seeing some of the things on the practice field that the team saw. And I think that kind of is where their tone and the things we've heard from them kind of stems from. Like, there has to be something that they're seeing there where they're like, man, this just really isn't coming along the way we'd hoped. Because if they had that belief in Trey Lance, I think that there would be a much greater tone of, we really appreciate what Brock came in and did for us. Our priority is to get him rehabbed and get him back. But right now we're focused on getting Trey Lance locked in as our starter going forward. And we still have a ton of belief in Trey Lance. And everything we heard was, well, Brock's still the guy. Trey's going to split reps with another quarterback we just signed 3 weeks ago. And it just doesn't reflect the level of confidence that you would hope to hear. So I just think at the end of the day, like, yes, that's still an outcome that's plausible. But I don't like that there's this like this whole narrative that it's like, oh, he could end up being really good. Like, any player could end up being really good. But if you sit around waiting for every player that you have to be really good, you're not going to succeed as an NFL franchise. And as much as they've been, they haven't really nailed the quarterback position in the 6 years that Lynch and Shanahan have been there. They've built a damn good roster. And in my eyes, like, they've earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to making most roster evaluations. Doesn't mean they're perfect. Doesn't mean you can't criticize moves that get made. But I think it's really difficult to sit here and be like, hey, you've built this really good roster everywhere else. You're making a huge mistake by letting this guy go that you won't commit to. And realistically, like, time will tell. It's certainly within reason. But you get what I'm saying? Like, I just think that it's kind of this, like, it's like a far-fetched thing at this point, and it's far more likely than not for most NFL quarterbacks that they don't pan out rather than they do. And we're in year 3, and the team that moved mountains to get the guy won't commit to him. That kind of reflects where they feel, like.
Yeah, which makes for this fascinating off season yet again surrounding the quarterback conversation. And I guarantee you, Jordan, this isn't going to be the last time that we talk about the quarterbacks because it's not figured out yet. We still got to make it through OTAs. We got to get into training camp. We got to see when Brock Purdy's back on the field because even the Brock Purdy thing, there's still a bit of an unknown. Like, how is Brock gonna respond? Like the hope and the everything that we've heard from the surgery, and like, yeah, he's gonna be fine. He's gonna be back and he'll be better than ever. And it'll be fine, no big deal. But that's still an unknown. So it's all a big unknown. And that's why, we're having the conversation about it, but it's going to continue to be fluid. And we're gonna continue to watch, observe, and talk about it when necessary. So and if you guys have watched, Jordan and I in the past, or watch it, we try not to talk a whole lot about the quarterback, only when we have to. And this was I think an appropriate time to really kind of dive deep into it. But I know we spent most of our time actually on the quarterback position. I do want to talk to you about some non-quarterback stuff. Um, when I actually kind of want to talk to you about the draft. I want to go back to some of the good old days when you and we're out here doing streams with like 5 people in here and we're just talking about draft prospects. When you look at the Hall of Free Agency, all the moves that they've made so far, and it does feel like there could be room for a couple more filler moves, but it feels like the big moves have been made. When you're looking at the draft and the 49ers having 3 third-round picks, how do you see the 49ers maneuvering the draft? Like, do you see them trading up? Do you see them standing pat? Like, from a global kind of perspective, like, how do you see them working through that process?
I think that I'd be shocked if they made all 3 picks in those spots. I think they have room to move up if there's a guy they like, or if they're content to stand pat and maybe there's a guy they like closer to the middle of the 4th round, they could move back. I would be surprised if 99, 101, and 102 all get made in those slots that they're in now. I think they position themselves really well. Like, there's not a huge pressing need. I think that they can kind of take the player they feel is the best fit for the team. And like I said, they have the ammunition to move up a little bit if there's a guy maybe 15, 20 slots ahead that they can go up and get. Hopefully, it's not for a running back. I'm just I don't like the value of 3rd-round running backs. I think it's much better to take one early in the second if you have a pick there. That's been a sweet spot for some impact guys, or you do it late in the draft. I really, really hope they don't do it again for another year. So honestly, they could announce any that or a kicker. If they announce any other position group other than a special teams guy or a running back, good pick. I'm going to be touting up the pick. I'm going to be excited, exuberant, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's some edge guys there that are good, right? There's I know you like Blake Freeland and some of these tackles that are going to be there. I expect them to move around a little bit. I also expected the same thing last year though, and they didn't. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how it plays out. But I think that just given the amount of picks they have, the amount of roster spots they'll inevitably have, I think they do have some wiggle room to kind of move around and play the board the way they like in return of, sacrificing some capital to move up and down the way they see fit.
Do you have? I know you said as long as they don't pick a kicker or a running back in the 3rd round, you're a happy guy. But if you had to have a preference, on obviously understanding kind of how the board is laying out right now, when you get past like the 1st round, because edge is obviously a premium position. If you got the tools and the traits, you're probably going early, or you're going in the 1st round. You get some guys who sneak out into the early second, and of course, you can find edge rushers deeper as well. But are you targeting edge? Are you looking for maybe a right tackle option? What are you kind of looking at there?
Honestly, I just go BPA. I would follow my board personally, whether it's a tackle, an edge guy, a safety, maybe. I think they could definitely use an infusion of youth on the back end there. Sean Gibson was fantastic for the team last year, but how many more years is he going to want to play? How many more years can you count on him playing at that high level? It's just unfortunate, he's I think he's 33 this year, 32. It's something that you'd have to look at, and if you could get a guy to pair with Hufanga for the foreseeable future on the back end. Mooney Ward's only 27. obviously Diamador Lenore is younger. You could have a core, 4 on the back end of your secondary who are all under the age of 30 for the foreseeable future. So I would definitely look there. There's some guys who I really like who might be kind of in that range. Again, the tackle, I think that it would be wise to bring somebody in who doesn't have the pressure of needing to start right away, because I do think that the difficulty in making the transition from playing offensive line in college to the NFL is something that kind of gets swept under the rug because it's not a skill position. We always talk about how difficult it is for receivers and quarterbacks or DBs. It's really hard for offensive linemen. And when you get guys like Spencer Burford who come in and contribute from day one, that's the exception, not the rule, right? That just highlights how special of a player Spencer Burford is. I wouldn't draft a guy counting on them to start from day one. Obviously, it ends up happening. That's great return on your investment. But I would definitely take a traits guy that you maybe have a little bit of wiggle room to develop behind the scenes a bit. You believe in McKivitz. You have somebody who's a veteran who has experience in the system that you can lean on, and then maybe you make that switch if that guy you bring in as a rookie, if that athletic upside is enough to deal with the growing pains that'll come with having him there. So I would just follow BPA. I don't think they should go into this targeting one singular position. I think they should just fill out their board like they normally do and, follow it as those picks come along.
Do you think cornerback should be kind of one of the top 150 picks? Do you think they should, or do you feel pretty comfortable with Mooney Ward, Diamador Lenore, Samuel Womack, Isaiah Oliver? Do you feel comfortable with those cornerbacks, or do you think cornerback could be a position that could be one of those like early, kind of fit into that early BPA?
Yes to both, but I think NFL teams should take edge rushers, corners, and receivers every single draft. I think that they should aggressively target those positions every single year, no matter how good they might be at those positions. I think when you start drafting for need is when you really lose course when you're building a roster, and you're not going to end up in an ideal spot, right? To me, you fill need in free agency. If you really have big needs, you go out, you overpay a veteran guy to come in and plug those gaps during the free agency period, and then you draft best player available and you figure out a way. I've never heard a team complain and say, hey, we have too many good cornerbacks. Oh man, we have too many good receivers. We have too many good edge rushers. And I think that those are premium positions that the more and more you're drafting those guys, you're obviously going to increase the amount of hit rate that you're going to have getting guys that are going to be long-term contributors on your roster. So yeah, I would aggressively target a cornerback. I would aggressively target an edge guy. I think you could throw O-line in there as well. But those three positions specifically, I think receiver, corner, and edge, I would just every single draft, I would have guys that I don't want to say overdraft, but even if you have a starter, I think they really believe in Drake Jackson. Obviously Nick Bosa is the defensive player of the year. If there's an edge guy they really like at 99, run to the board and take him. Like, turn in that draft card, sprint to the podium. Like, there's never a world that exists where you can have too many good edge guys.
Are you still holding out hope for Danny Gray to be able to develop as a wide receiver in the system? Because what's interesting about, like, obviously engaging with the fan base on a daily basis, a lot of people are out on Danny Gray. Do you feel like that wasn't a good pick, or do you feel like Danny still has some time to develop and can potentially be a guy that the 49ers rely on in year 2, year 3?
I think, yeah, he absolutely should. And I think that, I try to remind myself this and follow this as well, because I lose sight of this oftentimes myself. There's so many guys these days in the NFL that come in that are just good from day one. And I think the Niners have had their share of players that just come in as rookies and they immediately flash, that we forget that it takes some time to grow and make that adjustment. And it's going to be even harder to, have a big workload when you're fighting for targets with the NFL equivalent of the Avengers, when you have George Kittle and Debo and Ayuk, and then you add McCaffrey into the fold. Like, it's going to be really hard to get targets when there's just a pecking order of all-star level talent, right? So I think with a guy like Danny Gray, he has something that's always going to endear him to NFL coaches, which is just incredibly fast, blazing speed, right? Like, he's a guy that can take the top off of defense. I think he's a guy that is more than just a, straight line north to south threat. I thought he looked really good with the ball in his hands after the catch at SMU. I think that played a big role in the Niners selecting him where they did. And yeah, I think it takes time to get comfortable, and not everybody's written off. And again, this comes back to Trey Lance. That's why, I'm not saying I don't think Trey Lance is going to be good. I'm not saying that I don't think that he will be good. I'm just saying that, I'm basing this off what the team has told us and what their actions have told us, right? but there's still plenty of room where, hey, like it takes time for guys to develop. And that's quarterbacks, that's receivers, that's corners, any position you want to throw out there. Not everybody's going to get it from day one.
Right.
Obviously, there's going to be less patience for a top 5 quarterback than there is for a receiver that was taken at like 103 or 102 or wherever it was. But if you're gonna make the same argument for Danny Gray, you have to make the same argument for a guy like Trey Lance. Like at the end of the day, some guys just take longer to develop into that impact level contributor. And I think that patience is the most important thing. And I personally am trying to follow that and remind myself not everybody's going to have this right away. I remember you and I talked like just the 2021 season, like training camp. There were some days where it looked like, like Ambry Thomas was having a rough start as a rookie. But as the season went on, you could see the tangible improvement. And then he had that big interception that put them in the playoffs. And it's like, okay, well, hey, we need to temper our me talking to myself, I needed to temper my expectations a bit and realize that, like, hey, this guy coming in as a rookie has plenty of room to get better. So I think patience is the most important thing, Brad. And I need to be better about displaying patience with evaluations and understanding not every guy is going to be a massive success in their rookie season.
Speaking of Ambry Thomas, does he play into the quarterback position? Because we didn't see him at all last year. Like, is he in the plans for the future, you think?
I mean, his traits are just off the charts, man. And I can see what endeared them so much to take him where they did. He had a great game against Chase Claypool. I remember watching when Claypool was still at Notre Dame. And, at the time, he was a really good NFL receiver. People's opinions may have changed now, but he's still an NFL caliber receiver. Ambry Thomas put the clamps on him, man. And I'm like, okay, like I see what the vision is here. I think being able to run 4.3 and have that that ability to have the closing speed that he has and the ability to run with guys that he has, I think teams are always going to be willing to take a chance on him and not just throw in the towel yet. So I don't think the 49ers are going to give up on him. But I just think that right now there are some other guys who've shown that they're really talented and they need reps too. And I think Diamador Lenore is a guy who took a massive leap. Because I remember after the 2021 season, a lot of people were out on Diamador Lenore and they didn't think he was good enough. And he was fantastic for the 49ers down the backstretch of last season. Really good in the playoffs too. So, I just think it's a situation where you're not in a bad spot if you don't get a contribution from him, but it's far too early to just be like, you know what, nah, it's time with the team's done. He's not going to be, a contributor moving forward because he could have a really good camp. I hate to put it this way, but we've seen injuries really change the trajectory of a lot of this stuff. Yeah. We wouldn't have seen Lenore's great run down the backstretch last season if Emmanuel Moseley didn't have that unfortunate ACL injury in Carolina, right? So I think the traits, Brad, will always be something that they believe in as long as he's under contract with the team. And I think that's why they're not going to be in a huge rush to move on from him or cut him. I think they're going to give him every opportunity to show he can be that guy. Because you can't teach a guy to run 4.3, especially when they're running backwards. Let's not, it's much harder to have that burst when you're working backwards and backpedaling.
And I think patience is the perfect word for any of these young players. And, same thing with Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks was cast aside as a bust instantly before he even really had an opportunity to play a whole lot. So it goes both ways. And it also applies to, I think, the conversation that we started with, it applies to the quarterback position as well. We kind of just have to have patience. Again, a lot of what Jordan and I are trying to discuss here is kind of like what we're projecting based on a lot of the information that's being provided to us. We aren't in the building, so we have to kind of evaluate through the information and try to disseminate it and discern what is actually being said and what it means. So that's partially it. And then also like what we watch and see on tape, and then we bring it together and have these conversations. But the patience overall in regards to player development, not every player, like you said, develops at the same pace or at the same trajectory or have even the same opportunity. So that all plays huge defining factors into career arcs or whatever may potentially happen. Like Ambry had to play because they're like, listen, Trey Kirkpatrick ain't it. Like, we got to put Ambry out there because we got to figure out what we have. Obviously, Ambry had a down year and he dipped from what we've seen, but it'll be interesting to see how this entire team continues to develop. I mean, we got a lot of questions at the quarterback. I I feel pretty good about free agency. Do you feel pretty good about free agency, like in regards to going out and getting Javon and then getting a lot of other pieces that could potentially fill in? Like, feels like the 49ers do what they typically do. They go get their piece that they want that could be a plug and play type of guy, and then everyone else feels like they could be a role player. Do you feel like they did a pretty good job in free agency?
Oh, I think they nailed free agency. I was stunned that they went out and spent the money they did on Javon Hargrave. I didn't think that that was a realistic
Yeah.
outcome prior to free
Right.
agency.
Yeah.
I can't remember a time every time the Niners get a new player, I pull up, the game film that I have. I try to watch a couple games, get familiar, look for some things that maybe I didn't catch just watching them, observing from a broadcast, watching a different team play or whatever. I've never had more fun watching a new 49er play than I had watching Javon Hargrave. I watched pretty much every game he played over the last 2 seasons.
He's good.
And I just the guy is incredible. He is literally knocking on the door of that like Aaron Donald, Chris Jones level interior pass rushing talent. And you could
Would you
argue
say he's like maybe third in the NFL, kind of
yeah,
right behind those two guys?
and I think the 49ers have 2 top 5 guys now with him and Eric Armstead when we're talking about pass rushing ability from the interior. And I think that it's something that it's never going to get the glamour that edge rushers get and winning off the edge gets, but the ability to push a pocket from the interior is something that will always be the greatest detriment to an NFL offense trying to move the ball through the air. And I think that when you already have to deal with Nick Bosa on the outside and you already have to account for a guy like Armstead, and we've seen the flashes from Jake Jackson, and hopefully he takes a leap forward. Now you add Javon Hargrave to the mix too. I just don't know how opposing teams are going to be able to game plan for this Niners defense. They're going to have to get the ball out quick. It's going to be a ton of screens, a ton of quick 3-step drops, getting the ball out immediately, because you're just not going to have the ability to have a 5 or 7-step drop and get into your throwing motion like that. You're going to have to get the ball out. And I think that that's something that we saw a ton in 2019. The last couple of years, there's been flashes of it. But what Hargrave brings to the table elevates what has been the best defense in football the last couple of years to an even higher level. Like, it's incredible when you think about, like, they lost Ebukam, they lost Charles Omenihu, and they have a chance to get even better because of one guy coming in. And it just speaks volumes to how impactful he is. So I am really, really, really excited to see what Javon Hargrave can do. He's just a dude. Whatever label you want to throw on, beast, dude, that
Nice.
guy, whatever you want to. He's everything and then some. He's an incredible football player. And
He got that dog in him. But yeah, dude, I'm super, super excited because I really look at the 2019 San Francisco 49ers when it was Defoe, D Ford, Eric Armstead, rookie Nick Bosa. Like, I'm like, man, that was a huge reason, in my opinion, why the 49ers had so much success that season. And it's like, man, they've got like 3/4 of that D line back to like where they were when they went 13-3. It's like, who's that edge going to be? I mean, obviously they bring in Cleveland, who I think could be that maybe Omenihu guy, maybe guy who shifts inside and rushes the passer over the guard, or just kind of as a base down defensive end. But it will be fascinating to see if they target kind of a pass rushing specialist at all and bring him in for some of these kind of passing situations, because I feel like this defensive line is going to make it immensely harder on. And I mean, and you are like becoming a phenomenal expert at defensive line, because Omenihu, like all the tracking you did with Omenihu last year and how strong of a season he had, like, you're almost kind of like taking Hargrave and you're like, all right, we're going to put Hargrave in that Omenihu role potentially with Eric and Bosa. And if we can get someone on the other side, I mean, this defensive line could be really freaking good. And I'm really excited about it. And I think overall, like, kind of as we wrap up, like, I think this team, even with the, maybe you could say, lack of clarity, based on the comments that we heard from the owners meeting about the quarterback conversation, and again, another offseason of quarterback talk and what's it going to be, what's the range of outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. This is still a really damn good team. Like, they're still going to compete, like, regardless if it's Brock, Trey, or Sam, right? And that is a positive, I think, in of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope the takeaway, and I understand that it's not a time where we can have any definitive conclusion. So I'm not like reinventing the wheel by saying that. I'm not saying at all that I don't think Trey Lance will be good or I don't think he could start. I just am saying that, like, based on everything we've been told, based on the actions, based on what you hear from players, coaches, everything, like, I would ask the question, like, what exactly can Trey Lance do over the next 4 to 5 months that would solidify the belief in him that for whatever reason doesn't feel like is there now? Because I agree, like, there hasn't been a large enough sample size. I can't definitively come to a conclusion about Trey Lance as a quarterback because I haven't gotten to see very much of it. I've gotten to see his training camp reps and I've gotten to see the 4 games that he's played in. I don't think that's nearly enough to give a fair and accurate assessment of who he is. And it's especially not fair to project who he will become. But I do think, based on what the 49ers have said about Brock Purdy and based on what they're not saying about Trey Lance, it's fair to start looking at scenarios where it doesn't feel like they're as committed to him as you'd expect a team to be that invested that kind of capital in him. So I don't fault anybody for saying, hey, it's only been 4 games. We haven't seen enough. I am right there with you. I agree 100%. It doesn't feel like the 49ers have that same level of pause, because I think otherwise we'd be hearing a lot more about, hey, we just need to get him the reps. Oh, it's all about getting him the reps. And there'd be much more of a focus of getting him the reps rather than having him split reps with a guy like Sam Darnold, and rather than having these comments about Brock Purdy being the guy. So we'll see how it plays out. Again, it's March. There's a lot of time left to sort these things out. But again, the question I would ask, and I'd love to hear anybody's feedback. Anybody who follows me on Twitter, please feel free to reach out and tell me if you have an answer. I'd love to hear, like, just what exactly is Trey Lance supposed to do over these next few months that's going to supersede and, overtake what the 49ers got from Brock Purdy in December that gave them that level of confidence? Because I don't think it's equal footing. And I don't think it's necessarily, like, I don't know if fair is the right word, but, like, Trey Lance can't go out there and simulate a December game with the division on the line or a playoff game atmosphere in OTAs. That's completely out of his control. So what exactly can he do between now and then that's going to make them commit to him going forward?
Right. He can't simulate having strained oblique and cracked ribs, go play on a short week in Seattle, getting an injection and throwing 2 touchdown, 3 touchdown, whatever it was, and clinching the division. Like,
Yeah.
it's it I understand where you're coming from. It will be fascinating, though. It will be absolutely fascinating. Again, I don't think we can rule out Trey Lance at all. Like, we just gotta keep an open mind, because the hope for Trey is he does beat out Sam. He does, like, take that next step forward. The confidence, I think the biggest thing with Trey is just consistency, just consistently hitting the throws that you should hit. We know we can make the wow plays. I think that's, like, one of the hard parts with the evaluation of Trey's. We've seen the deep balls. We've seen the lasers outside the numbers. We've seen him be able to escape, reset, throw. Like, we've seen him have a lot of success doing a lot of different things. It's just stringing it together with having a consistent, like, okay, we feel comfortable in saying this is who Trey Lance is. I think still we're just like, we see the talent, like, it's there. He has the potential, but that's where it lies with, we keep coming back to that word potential, right? So it'll be fascinating to see. I still think he has an op. Roman says, I know we always talk about Buck, but man, I'll never forget being so hyped after watching D Ford coming off of injury and tormenting Cousins in that playoff game. Ford was the ideal counterpart to Bosa. And I know the 49ers get a lot of flack for the D Ford trade, Jordan, but I think Roman's right. I mean, second round pick, they go get D Ford in a trade from the Chiefs. D Ford was the ideal counterpart to Nick Bosa, and they just unfortunately haven't been able to find that counterpart since, unfortunately, injuries derailed Ford's career.
It's really a tough topic, right? Because, there were some injury concerns prior and availability issues prior. So I think it's a fair thing to say, well, hey, they should have known that this was within the range of outcomes when they gave him that money and they moved the pick for him. But if we're talking strictly on the player, D Ford is one of my favorite edge rushers I've ever had the chance to evaluate and watch closely. He is just, like, the speed he had off the edge was unreal. But I think what ends up happening is people often that speed overshadows just how complete of a pass rusher he was. because he was so good at converting speed to power. He was an exceptionally strong guy for how fast he was. He had some of the most natural bend that I've seen at the position in years from any team, not just the 49ers. And yeah, I think you're right. He absolutely complimented Bosa really well. And he was a phenomenal player. And I think, unfortunately, this game of football is brutal, and it's exceptionally brutal at that level. And I think those injuries just unfortunately took their toll, and his body just wasn't able to hold up. And I think that's one of the many reasons why I'm such a big proponent of these guys getting as much guaranteed money as possible, because it can happen at any moment, and you never really can predict it. Even if there are signs or there's, injury history, I think the rapidness in which it happened with D Ford, it's not something anybody could have seen coming the way it happened. But a couple plays go differently, they win that Super Bowl in 2019. I don't think anybody's arguing about the contract he got or the pick they gave up to get him. I think he's an exceptional player, and they're not the same player. They're different in a lot of ways, but I think that Drake Jackson has the ability to win off the edge in some similar ways. I think he has that bend, and I think he's a guy that's poised to have a great second season. I'm a very big believer in his talent. I had very similar thoughts about Aaron Banks after year one, where it was like, well, he didn't see the field or he didn't do this as a rookie. And I'm like, hey, until I see otherwise, I'm going to trust my evaluation of what I saw coming out. And he had a pretty good year too. I'm feeling very similarly about D Ford, my brain. Drake Jackson in year two, where I think he's going to have this leap where maybe he's not going to be a 12, 13 sack guy, but you're going to start seeing these flashes, and you're going to start seeing these traits that, again, you can't teach. You either have or you don't. And then you hand them over to a guy like Chris Kosarek and a guy like Darryl Tapp, and they're able to really fine tune and get that exceptional production out of him. So, hopefully they have that guy now. But I'll be honest, the only guy in the league right now who I really get those D Ford vibes from, that's like a younger player, is Josh Uche on the Patriots. And I loved him coming out of Michigan. I would have loved the 49ers to end up getting him. And it's so funny because the Patriots actually drafted him with the pick that the Niners sent to the Chiefs and ended up going to New England. So the pick, the pick that they traded for D Ford went to the D Ford clone.
Was the younger D Ford.
Who's now carrying the D Ford legacy in New England. Yeah, he's incredible. If anybody, if you're into watching pass rushers as much as I am, just look up some of his highlights. I have some. If you look up my name on Twitter, I think I have some highlights I posted. He's an incredible player. If I was John Lynch, I would have Bill Belichick blocking my phone number because I'd be calling every day. Like, Brad has the Brian Burns agenda. I have the Josh Uche agenda. I'd be calling New England every single day until they were tired of seeing my name on caller ID, asking what it would take to get this guy.
I freaking love it. We love a good agenda around here. Your boy Too Sweet says, with the addition of Austin Bryant and Cleveland Farrell, could y'all see the Niners taking KJ Henry, another defensive end, out of Clemson? I think KJ will potentially be there at 99. What do you think? Do you think his traits would fit? I think he's kind of I think he has pass rushing upside, and he also has an ability to be a good defender in the run game. He feels like a complete defensive end in a sense, but what do you think?
He's 6'4", 33-inch arms, 251. Like, he fits all of the size profile that the Niners seem to really be looking for with their edge guys. At that size, running 4.63, he had the 1.65 10-yard split. Like, I think the measurables are definitely there. I think he definitely would be somebody that could fit the profile. I really think the Niners have kind of found this prototype with guys that are in that, 6'4", longer arms, kind of 250 to 260.
Play inside out.
Yeah, exactly. Ameni, he was a little bit bigger. I think that maybe I should say 250, 275, like in that range. They definitely have a type, it feels like. And I think that Henry definitely checks the boxes there. I think he would be a great addition. I think he's somebody, he might be off the board a little bit sooner, but if he was there at 99, I think he'd be absolutely a great pick for them.
Yeah, he does seem like he has kind of that versatility to be able to be a pass rusher and a guy who could be a potential 3-down player. So I think that's, the 49ers, I think they want to get a 3-down edge, but again, I'm still on this hunt. Like, if you can get me the elite traits for a pass rusher and then you just rotate guys, we've seen how Chris has done a phenomenal job of being able to put these packages together, and he's rotating guys all over the place or playing them out of position, whatever. And the success he's gotten out of them, I'm still like, if you can get me, even if he just has to be on the field for pass rushes only, like I want that. I want that Brian Burns speed, that Josh Uche speed, that that D Ford speed. I'm definitely looking for that, but I do think KJ Henry would be a good option for the San Francisco 49ers as well. So it'll be fascinating to see. Do you let's end on this question. Do you think the San Francisco, because I just saw this come across, Justin Houston, do the 49ers, they're first of all, there's like Clowney, Frank Clark, Justin Houston. There's some quality edges still on the open market. What do you think's going on there? And do you think the 49ers even still maybe pull one of these guys on a 1-year contract?
I think the Niners are at a spot now where they're letting guys come to them. And I think that it's like, hey, if it gets to a point where their market maybe isn't where they want it to be, and especially for a guy like Justin Houston, who's maybe a little bit later in their career, where they're like, hey, I just want to go to a good spot. I want, I want to add some more hardware. I'd love to get a ring. This is a team that I can continue to add to my legacy on. I think that's something that makes more sense rather than the Niners aggressively pursuing them, because I think that as of now, it's still it's later in the process than there's that like saying, if you don't get the money you want on day one of free agency, you're probably not going to get it in day 10 or 15 or whatever it may be. I really like Jadeveon Clowney, and I know a lot of people don't think he's good, or they think he's a bust, or they think he doesn't try, or all these things. The guy still if you're getting 60% of him, that's still better than 100% of a lot of guys. So I will forever be on that train of I would love to see what he could do with Chris Kocurek, and if maybe Chris Kocurek is the guy to really tap into that immense physical potential. But I think Justin Houston is a little bit more practical. I think he's a guy that would be a great mentor for a guy like Drake Jackson. He's still extremely, extremely productive. I did an article for him before free agency. I think it was like February, like a month ago, something like that, about just, what his productions look like, how those sacks have come. And it's not just like he's getting these, cleanup sacks or a coverage sack. Like, he's still winning with a ton of power off the edge, still has good bend, has great speed. Is not a guy who plays at the age that his play does not reflect his age. He still looks very good for how old he is and how long he's been in the league. So I would love to see them bring in Justin Houston. I just think it's a scenario, Brad, where it's like, it would be more of a situation where it's like these agents are approaching the Niners down the line, and it's like, hey, let's work something out here. And it's one of those cost efficient deals where during the season we're like, how the hell did they get this guy for such little, cap hit? But I don't think they're going to go out and spend big on an edge guy.
Yeah, I kind of agree. A guy that, I've been interested in, kind of came on to late, was like Rasheem Green, 6'4", 280, I wouldn't say he's like a pure edge rusher. I would say he's kind of that Omenihu guy, right? He feels like he would rush over the guard. He can rush from the outside, but feels like he'd rush over the guard, kind of in those NASCAR packages or whatever. So there are guys still out there that could actually be pretty impactful for the 49ers. But I do kind of agree with you. It does feel like they're just like, hey, we filled all the major kind of holes and kind of the ancillary back end. We're just kind of waiting and seeing. And it'll be interesting to see if they make any of these types of moves, whether it's a Clowney, whether it's a Houston, Green, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be fascinating. But I think the 49ers are in a good spot, regardless of the constant quarterback. I guess is it drama now? Are we calling it drama, or is it just still a situation? What are you classifying it as?
It's a quarterback entanglement. We'll call it that.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that. We got a quarterback entanglement on our hands, and we will see how it ultimately plays out. If you guys aren't yet, please follow Jordan at Splash Cousin. I promise you, it will be one of the best things you ever do as a 49ers fan. I mean, this dude is built different. Do you have any stuff that you're working on? Any stuff that you're coming out with later this week? Any other shows? What do you got cooking on the books?
Yeah, so I'm doing a ton of draft stuff now. I'm lining up some interviews with one-on-one with some guys that I'm just going to be doing some profiles. I'll add some, film clips and just some background on some guys who I think will be there when the 49ers will be picking and who I think would be a good fit for the team. Just trying to get a good sense of who these guys are as a prospect, who they are as a player, teammate, just as much background as possible, and kind of format it in a way where it's, a good resource for fans that maybe, don't have the time to pour over and look at all the, intricacies of every single prospect, but just want a summarized profile kind of each guy and hearing a little bit from them. And just, more draft stuff like that. I was actually, I don't know if your boy Too Sweet's still in here, but KJ Henry's a guy I haven't gotten to yet. So maybe I'll get to him today and I could do something. If you check NinersNation tomorrow, maybe I'll have something on him that I can go a little bit more in depth. I always like watching a little bit more film, and especially with defensive line guys, having something tangible to fall back on and point to when I'm doing evaluations or giving opinions. So maybe I'll work on that today, and that'll be up tomorrow. So I apologize for not giving you a better answer in the moment, but hopefully the long form answer will be better. Brad and all these guys who do the YouTube and the podcast and the great video content are fantastic. I personally am much more comfortable when I'm typing and I'm behind a keyboard than in front of a microphone. So I feel like my evaluations and my work are a little bit stronger then. So hopefully I can provide something via text that's a little bit better than what I was able to give you today over voice here.
No, don't sell yourself short, Jordan. You're phenomenal on the mic too, and I appreciate you hopping on, man. It's always a blast talking with my guy. Make sure you are following him, man. He is, just like Mariah says, the GOAT. GM Jordan in the building. Appreciate you as always, my boy. And I mean, we are out of that kind of free agency period. This, I think, is the week of drama, and then the draft is like fully in front of us. And so I'm really excited. Maybe we can get you on here for a couple more draft segments, a little bit of Jordan McShay, Brad Kuiper action. We'll get Jordan back in the suit like the good old days. But appreciate you as always, Jordan, for hopping on with me. And again, make sure you follow Jordan at Splash Cousin on Twitter. Any parting words for us here before we get out of here?
Yeah, just, like the quarterback stuff is rough, right? But I would just say, like, this team is so talented everywhere else that as long as they have just baseline, like slightly above mediocre level play, they should sleepwalk to 10, 11 wins next year. So I know it's frustrating and I know people want to figure it out, but for whatever glass half full, outlook I'm offering here, like, I still think that the 49ers are in a really good spot. And I think that they proved it last year by winning 13 games with 3 different quarterbacks, all at various stages of development in their career. So there is a lot of things to be optimistic about. And I completely understand the fatigue of this discussion and being tired of it. Anybody who follows my work, I really don't dive into the quarterback stuff too often. That's where I kind of hide with my defensive line stuff and doing other things because I don't know what else I can really add that hasn't been said. But yeah, just they're in a good spot. And as long as they just get like baseline average level of play, which I think they could get from any of the 3 guys currently on the roster, they're going to be a really good football team next year. So there's a lot of things to be happy about going forward. And they have a ton of picks in a range where they've found some really good football players coming up. I think that John and Adam are cooking up something special. That front office and those scouts have been working really hard, and I think that we're going to have a good draft this year. So even though it doesn't feel like it maybe right now, it just feels like, oh God, here we go again, another year of this. Things are trending up, and they're in a great spot. So there's a lot of things to be happy about beyond the quarterback stuff. And I will do my best to kind of highlight those other things and add a different level of – or not a different level, sorry, just a different thing to talk about because I know it can be very tiring. We unfortunately have to do it, but I can see how people are getting tired of it because I'm tired of it, and I have to do it. So I get it.
QB fatigue is real for 49ers fans. So we 100% sympathize, but Jordan said it perfectly. The San Francisco 49ers are still trending up regardless of the quarterback position. And we've seen what they've been able to do. I mean, the 49ers were knocking on the door of the Super Bowl yet again with their third string, four string quarterback even. So we'll see. Feels like they've insulated the quarterback. We'll see who ultimately rises to the top. But again, thank you as always, Jordan. Thank you to everyone in the chat vibing with us today. Appreciate you guys as always. And that is it for us. Make sure to like and subscribe. And we're out of here for now. Peace. Smash that like button if you haven't already. Love to see you.